Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Pick and Mix podcast with Leadership Launchpads with me, Chris Baker. And today, dun, 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 our guest is Keziah Featherstone, who, wow, I've got a slide that I usually put on with when it goes on kind of Spotify and stuff, with all the things that the guest has done. And I didn't have enough space on the slide to put all the things that you're involved in. And so we've got executive head teacher kind of title. And you
Yeah.
can tell us a bit more about the other things. We've got the Mercy and Trust, we've got Women Ed, we've got Head Teachers Round Table, we've got three books. Three books, am I right?
Yeah.
Three big books, which I loved. Punk Leadership, love it. I'm a bit of a Boy Scout, so I need a bit of I have I've kind of lent into some of the 10% braver stuff offline. I didn't
Yeah.
buy the book, but the punk leadership stuff I loved. And if you haven't read it yet, there's some really nice stuff in there. I love the bit about was it flat pack head teachers?
Yeah. They
They
are a bit. They keep popping
are
up on the telly, actually.
really.
Yeah. I don't want to offend anybody, but I do go to an awful lot of functions where there's a lot of navy blue suits and brown
Right.
shoes.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, to make you feel better, I cycled into work the other day and I took two odd shoes. Check me out. Luckily, they were left and right, so I got away with it. But I was definitely not walking around the office much that day. Anyway,
That's brilliant.
let's get
That's good.
cracking. So, what we'd love to know, first of all, I guess, is tell us a bit about your role at Mercian, but then I'd love to know a bit more about the story about how you got there.
I'm an executive head teacher at the Mercy and Trust, and I got there because um, I was in Bristol after having worked in the West Midlands for a really long time. And my former CEO, Dr. Caroline Badial, an amazing woman, wanted to sponsor a failing academy that had been inadequate for, well, forever, really. I don't think it had ever been good. And it was looking for a new sponsor. It was a snow school, schools no one wants, mostly because that its reputation was through the roof, well, through the floor, I suppose. 22 supply teachers because they couldn't recruit,
Wow.
over £1 million in debt. Um, it is still PFI, and the PAN was 300, and of course you pay your PFI based on what the PAN is, not how many children are there. So she said, "I've got a school for you. Will you come back to the West Midlands?" Um, and I said yes, and
Right.
it's because I came up to visit, and there was nothing wrong with the school
Right.
apart from some really poor decisions that had been made. People had lost heart, and I really wanted that challenge. I really
Wow.
wanted to go and do something. So I started there. Um, and it was a very small multi-academy trust, Q3 schools, just three when what became Q3 Academy Tipton joined. And then around about the same time as COVID, Caroline wanted to retire. The sponsor, who was one of the original sponsors, decided that he sort of wanted to retire, and it was fair enough. I mean, I think he's in his 80s now, and he just wanted to hand over. So there was this merger. I mean, technically there isn't such a thing as a merger, but Eric, the sponsor, and Caroline, they found a like-minded West Midlands trust who wanted to work with us, and we became part of the Mercy and Trust. So I was still head of Q3 Academy Tipton in the Mercy and Trust, and then it was proposed to me that I could um, sort of develop some other young leaders. And, I mean, I suppose they wouldn't see themselves as young, but, once you're my age, everyone
Yeah.
seems young. And that's what I did. I sort of, I worked with a couple of associate head teachers at Tipton. I have worked with an associate head teacher at the Ladder School, which is alternative provision, but I also have some responsibilities centrally within the trust. I've been delivering their leadership development programs. I've sort of been taking responsibility because I'm not busy enough. I just thought I'm going to
Yeah.
take on whole trust induction. I lead on EDIB that's equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And I always insist on the B there, because I think if people feel that they belong and they really matter, then they stay.
Yeah.
That's both for children and for staff. So there are a couple of things that I do in the day job.
Take us even further back then. So, what subject? Is it secondary or primary specialism?
My specialism is secondary, and I um, long ago at the start of the 90s, I wanted to be a poet.
Okay.
So I went off to Manchester Met to do the only joint honours in the country at that time with writing. So I did cultural studies and writing because I wanted to be a poet. And then quite close to the end, I thought that there's probably not enough in poetry to keep me insider. So I just thought I'll become an English teacher.
Yeah.
And I had to kind of prove that cultural studies and writing was enough
Right.
to allow me onto the English course. And I loved it, absolutely loved it. And then just worked around lots of West Midlands schools as English teacher, head of English, head of sixth form, sort of assistant head teacher, deputy head teacher. And then went down to Bristol for my first headship, which there was some lovely stuff, but ultimately it didn't finish great. And then I've come back to the Midlands and probably be here until I retire.
Nice. And the punk thing, is that always been around, or is it new, or is it a musical reference? Is it just a sort of lifestyle?
It,
Or
it I guess it was around about the same time as I was coming back to the West Midlands after Bristol, and I wrote an article. I think I went to Festival of Education. I did a session called Punk Leadership,
right.
and um, Scoresby asked me if I'd write an article about what the heck it was about. Um, so I wrote an article, and then I remember being at the Q3 Academy trustees meeting. They're like, "This is very interesting,"
Oh no.
and they were all, basically quite elderly white men who were very conservative, probably with a small c.
Yeah.
But I was just thinking, oh, because after my festival education, I had about 4 publishers come up to me and
Oh
say,
really?
"We want to do this book," um, and I was thinking, okay, better wait until they
Yeah.
all retire. I did sort of tinker with bits beforehand. I've never really liked fitting into a mold
Right.
and doing things that are necessarily expected just
Yeah.
because that's the status quo.
Sure.
And sometimes you just got to smash things up a bit. And I've
Yeah.
always loved punk, so I just thought it kind of blended together. To be honest, quite often you could use any sort of cultural phenomenon or subculture. My friend Aisha Small, she's part of the movement hip hop teaching, and sort of it's just, come on, be creative, do
Yeah.
something that works for you.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure this will be a theme for today's kind of episode, but that idea of not not having to conform and just being as authentic as you can all the time, because people follow that, don't they? People connect with it, they follow it, and they do the opposite if they feel like they don't know if you're being genuine. Anyway, let's get stuck into the
I'm just
first.
gonna
Yeah, carry on.
That's it. I'm just gonna have to go and get a power lead.
You
Sorry.
carry on. Yeah, I will tell the listeners about. If you're new to the podcast, the Pick and Mix podcast is kind of designed around kind of getting behind the leader of the leadership. So it may be that we know these leaders like Keziah from the books she's read or the movements that she kind of leads and stuff. But we've probably heard all those sorts of stories. And so I wanted to start a podcast that got behind that and kind of find out about how did these amazing people become so amazing and were they always amazing? And as you'll see during the episode, we have kind of some set like pieces. So we have things called fast friends questions, which we'll get into in a moment. And the idea behind those is a set of researchers were researching how to make social connections as quickly as possible. And they created a set of what they called fast friends questions. And they were 36 questions that got increasingly more kind of vulnerable. And the idea was that, if you were to go through these questions with another individual, you would definitely feel a closer connection by the end of it. So we've asked Keziah to pick a couple of fast friends questions. We've also asked her to pick a couple of launchpad images from the book that resonated with her. And so I'll kind of talk through those and explain what I was thinking when I made them. And then we'll ask her why it resonates with her. And then the last element that we go through is something called an ignition point. And this really is the bit where we get behind the leader and we find out, are there elements of their lives or events that have, significantly transformed them? And so that's the sort of structure for a typical podcast. And so we all set to go, Keziah?
I think so. As you know, I've been having a bit of an issue with most of my tech. I think I might have found the right charger now.
Okay, happy days.
It's
Well,
not plugged in.
yeah, that's always a classic, isn't it? I was joking with Kezia before we came on that I won an award once for new technologies, and so now I have actually been introduced at my work as the IT guy, which I tried not to take personally. I try not to like get my doctorate out and all that sort of stuff to prove I wasn't. But I guess hey, if you're good at something, you're good at something. Um,
Yeah, I think I should be okay.
like most
Who
things, it's kind
knows
of
though?
turn it off, turn it on again. So
Oh.
let's go with this first question then. So the one you picked was, if you could go to dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be? So tell us who that is.
Okay, well, you're going to find that I'm really rubbish at keeping to the rules. So
Oh,
I've
good.
I've I've thought of sort of three potential types of dinner.
Okay, I love it.
Um, Now, if Chris asked if I was allowed to go to a nice little romantic dinner,
Yeah, yeah.
then I would of course be taking the Romanian American actor Sebastian Stan, who
Right.
is also known as the most handsome man in the world ever. And I when I had my own office, now I kind of have to just wander wherever I go. I had a big 6 foot cutout of him in my
No,
office,
you
which for the
didn't.
first couple of weeks of being there, I'd let myself into my office and jump because I thought someone was about to attack me, and then I realised it was Sebastian Stan's cutout.
I love
Um,
that.
so so if I was going to go for a romantic dinner,
And for
it
people
would it
who
would
aren't,
definitely be that.
I know this is going to offend you, but for people who aren't familiar who he is, does he play Winter Soldier in
He
Avengers?
does play he does also and this is quite depressing. He played Trump
Okay.
in The Apprentice. He got I think a Golden Globe nomination for that. Different Man. He's in I Tonya. He's in lots of things, and you think, oh yeah, 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 yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah,
Okay, so that's the romantic one.
yeah. So if I wanted to go and have a good old laugh,
Yeah.
and really sort of forget me woes and de-stress from a long day, I would probably go for Robin Williams.
Yes.
Um, because
Oh,
he's got that sensitive, more vulnerable side to him, but he is also just really bloody funny.
oh my
So
God.
I love him in lots of things.
Yeah.
And he was just so infectious, and we know that a lot of that was a mask, but I think that would be a wonderful dinner guest. And um, you know, and of course, I'm not going to say that, you know, you know, Dead Poet Society is responsible for me being a teacher, because I think that's a bit of
Yeah, well, for
a
lots of
sort of
people it is.
a cliche, but certainly you just
Mm.
think, oh, I mean, no kid's ever stood on their chair for me like that. I mean, they've stood on chairs, but normally when I don't want them to. So
So,
absolutely. And then if I really wanted one of those dinners where you get to talk about some of the most important issues in the world and really think about how the world works, I would go for the American novelist Toni Morrison,
okay.
who is the best writer that has ever lived and
Wow.
one of the most important people that has ever lived. And her writing is absolutely astounding. Um, and she writes about really important things around gender and ethnicity and the American experience, and just her prose is gorgeous. So yeah, absolutely,
It's
she would be
great.
my sort of my grown up dinner guest.
Give us some. If you had to choose one of her titles that other people should read, what's your favourite?
I would go for Paradise,
Paradise.
um, which is I used to make a whole lesson out of the opening sentence to that novel, which is they shoot the white girl first.
Wow.
And that's in the present tense. And I would dissemble every single word.
Mm,
Who is they?
yeah.
And sorry, I've got my dogs here as well, so they're going to just be attacking. So if you can hear
Love it.
something that sounds amorous, the dogs are in their post-dinner amorous stage. But no, the use of the word white girl, because she's not, she is black, but she's whiter than the others in
Right.
terms of the tone of her skin. And it's the beginning of an absolutely amazing book that it sort of explores misogyny.
Wow.
But it's yeah, that one I would go for.
There you go. There's your first recommendation, people. Well, that is fascinating. And again, we could go into more detail, but a lot of times when I speak to people like yourself, I feel a bit sad because I didn't have exposure to much literature or even culture when I was a kid.
Mm,
And so I really feel like I've kind of missed out a little bit when people speak really passionately about stuff. I feel like, oh, yeah, what a shame. So I'm trying as
mm,
much as I can to squeeze that into my own kids' lives now.
yeah. I mean, you've sometimes you've got to come to things when you're ready.
Yeah, true.
Um, and when you're younger,
Yeah.
you may not, running around is much more fun. I wasn't doing. I call myself a born again reader. I sort of read a
Okay.
lot as a kid, and then all the time I suppose I had to study at school myself, I went off it.
Yeah.
And then at uni it was cultural studies.
Right.
So it was more than just writing.
Yeah.
And then you find it again when you find something that really speaks to you.
Yeah.
Um, and I think I read an Alice Walker book, Possessing the Secret of Joy, all in one night when I was at uni.
Oh, wow.
Just started reading. I was a bit bored, so I started about 8 o'clock. Just
Yeah.
literally read it all the way through to the morning, um, and that was it. I was back in.
Yeah. Well, sadly, I don't think they included fiction so much when they say that leaders are readers. All leaders are
Yeah,
readers. I mean, I think we could probably do with a bit more fiction in our lives to escape from you know, the sort of roll. Anyway, let's keep pushing on
absolutely.
because I'm really interested to hear about this first ignition point. So, the one you chose, the title you gave me was "We Don't Do Those Postcodes." What does that mean?
It was when I was in the first year of my headship in Bristol, and you'll know Bridge Learning Campus in Hartcliffe.
Hmm.
Um, Extremely high levels of pupil premium free school meals. And Hartcliffe, I suppose, has a sort of a reputation around it. It's a mostly white working class social housing area. It feels separate from the rest of Bristol, which
Yeah,
everybody thinks of Banksy and things that are really cool. And the office that I was in had this amazing view down from Hartcliffe. You can see Clifton Suspension Bridge, and you can see obviously Clifton in the distance. And I was talking to the CEO at the time, and we were saying, well, if our kids came from over there, the other side of the bridge, and they were struggling with their GCSEs, what would we do? And it was, well, we'd probably get them private tutoring. Um, so we sort of acknowledged that the parents probably wouldn't be able to afford that. So we explored with the company about whether we could sort of buy in sort of large scale private tutoring. And the first company we approached came back to us and said, "Oh, okay, so yeah, we're happy to do that. This is how much it's going to cost. Every kid can have 10 hours. It will be, English and or maths." Um, Sorry, there goes the dog again. And when we told them where the children live, they just flat out refused to come. They said, "We don't do those postcodes."
oh my
They
goodness.
refused to come from. I mean, in Bristol, everything takes 10 million hours to drive, but they were literally a mile away, 2 miles away, and they refused to come to our side of the city and take our money
Yeah,
and tutor our children because they didn't want to be in those homes. And I think that ignited that, I suppose. I mean, I've always felt. I mean, I wouldn't have gone to Hartcliffe if I didn't. I've always felt the need and the desire to really work with children from under-resourced backgrounds that perhaps don't have as much as their peers, the more affluent peers, and that really underlined to me how, I mean, I just couldn't make Bristol work for me, Chris.
No,
I couldn't, everything about the city, it was, I describe it now as educational apartheid. And
right.
and it was definitely split between the north side of the city and the south side of the city. And you were really looked down on depending on, firstly, where you came from, but
Yeah.
also where you worked. And no, there was no collegiate way of working. The first year I was there, a neighbouring school had paid for a billboard close to all the South Bristol schools with their exam results on it and all the other exam results from South Bristol schools. And it was unvalidated data.
Oh my goodness.
And they had their sort of their data, which I believe was like the best case scenario it could have been.
Right.
Um, and it was just everything about it was adversarial,
Yeah.
and it was a horrible environment to work in, and the kids deserve better.
Yeah. Well, that in itself is interesting, isn't it, for people that are listening around, because a lot of times when things aren't going well, our natural response is to look to ourselves, as you know, but it's a bit like we sometimes we tell trainee teachers, don't we, if they aren't successful in a certain school. And I've had people say, "Oh, I'm quitting teaching. I'm quitting
Yeah.
education. I can't do this." And I have to try and remind them that they are one part of the equation, but
Mm,
environment is another big, and maybe a change of environment
mm.
changes them. I mean, did you feel that when you went back up north?
Yeah. I mean, the West Midlands, there are pockets of real affluence, but there are large areas where, you know, there's degrees of sort of disadvantage, but generally speaking, it's less stark.
Right.
And certainly working in Samwell, where Tipton is, and the other three Q3 schools were, pretty much every head was in the same boat. Everybody understood where you were coming from. I remember when I came up and I said to one of the serving head teachers, yeah, I'm coming into Q3 Tipton, and she goes, "Is that a new school? Are they building a new one?" I said, "No, it's," and I named the old school, and she just gave me a hug. She goes,
Nice.
"God, they need you," and that's what that's the
Yeah.
difference. There's a lovely WhatsApp group, and everybody's supportive of one another, and it was essential during COVID because although some of us had trusts that were supporting us, there were also some local authority schools left who just didn't have a clue what to do, and they were getting a million emails and no one was contacting them, just didn't know what to do. So it was like talking to them and having these meetings and just say, right, well, here's a copy of our risk assessment, and it was wonderfully
Yeah.
supportive. And yeah, that was not the case in
No.
other
Well,
places I've
I think
worked.
you said earlier, that idea that of a kind of adversarial environment.
Yeah,
That's not
it's
what it is.
it is it wasn't pleasant, and I can't believe I actually lasted as long as I did. But yeah, um, yeah, much better now. And of
Right.
course, I'm from the southwest. I'm
Yeah.
raised on the mean streets of Bath. Parents still live in Somerset.
Lovely.
Um, you know, when I go down for any length of time, the accent does come back. I'm sure talking to you, it will come back.
Oh my God.
Um, but
I did.
but
I
yeah,
did.
it wasn't nice, and it was.
Oh shoot, we've lost her. One of my favourite stories I usually tell people is that I went travelling after I finished my degree, and I did 6 years of kind of solo travelling, and did all the normal things, like a year in Australia, and then I did all the sort of backpacking through Thailand and all that, to South America, and then the United States, and I ended up with this really kind of eclectic um, kind of accent, which I was super pleased with because I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder from when I was a kid. about being from the West Country and having this sort of like ooh kind of farmer accent, that I was chuffed that I'd managed to lose it. And I must have been back in Bristol for maybe 2 weeks, sort of hanging out with my parents again. And yeah, I was very, very quickly kind of rolling my R's and my R's. And I was like, God damn it, I spent 6 years and about, God knows, 20, 30,000 pounds of money trying to escape this accent. And but here it is. All right, well, we're going to take a pause just while Keziah comes back online. So it says you've got.
Sorry about that.
That's right. It says you've got. It says I've got a message that says Keziah has Riverside open in other tabs. Ask Keziah to close all other browser tabs open with Riverside. I don't know what that
Sorry
means,
about
but
that.
maybe you've got it
It
open more.
means that I've just gone a bit mental, I think.
Got it open more than once. How's it working now?
Thanks for persevering.
Oh, I love it. I love all this stuff. And again, like me and you, I mean, if you get flustered by this, you ain't got to, you shouldn't be in executive or senior leadership.
No, no, no,
Yeah.
no, absolutely.
All
Just
right,
thank you
here
for
we
being
go.
patient.
Oh, my pleasure. Here we go then. We're back. I was just saying to Keziah how, yeah, if one of the skills that they should teach on MPQs and stuff is just to be comfortable in sort of uncomfortability, if that's the right word. Anyway,
Yeah,
let's keep cracking on, shall we? We're going to talk about your first launch pad.
yeah,
And so I'm going to share my screen and then I'll explain what I was thinking when I made it. And then you can tell us a bit about what you were thinking. And so
yeah,
for those that are long-time listeners, you may have seen this one before because it is quite popular and certainly something that once I tripped over it, thought, oh, hang on a minute. I need this in my kind of toolkit forevermore. And so it's a leadership tool called the Ladder of Inference. And as you can see at the bottom, if you're not listening, it was kind of first created in the 70s and then updated in the 90s. And there's this idea of kind of like is a series of sequential steps that aim to improve your kind of the inferences you make from a situation, but also the decisions that you make. And the idea is that kind of you start at the bottom, and so we'll do that with the image. There's this kind of idea that the bottom rung is your first step in this, and you then can ask a series of questions as you go up, either before you make a decision or after you've made a decision to try and understand it a bit better. And so the first rung of the ladder is called observing. And there's this idea that you've got access, obviously, to a crazy amount of data. Now, not just we're talking data like numbers and stuff, but things you can see, things you can hear, things you can read, all kinds of stuff. And of course, the first question we should have on our mind is, what data should I observe? And if you're looking at this after the fact, it's like, wow, did I even start with the right data? That's the first question. And you kind of move up the next ladder to select, because, of course, it's rare that you would be able to analyze or think about all of the data. But that's the first potential challenge, because, of course, you first got to make a decision of what data which is available is most valid and reliable. And then, of course, afterwards, you're asking whether I selected the right one, because your selection of the data then pretty much drives every next step. So if you get that bit wrong, you're off to a kind of bad start, and sometimes you don't come back from that. The next one is interpreting. So, of course, you've observed, you selected, now you interpret. So where can I find the meaning? And, of course, after the fact, you'd be asking, oh, did I make the right inferences? You move up then again to assumption, which I think is probably one of the scariest ones, one of the ones that is probably most dangerous, probably the hardest for an individual to kind of identify, because a lot of our assumptions are usually unconscious. This is where this ladder of inference is quite useful to do in teams.
Mm.
What assumptions am I making, or what assumptions did I make? You jump then up to kind of what most people probably fast track to, which is dangerous, is what have I concluded? Do you know, it's for lots of people, they jump from I've selected the data, now I've made a conclusion, and they miss out all those steps. And it's kind of what the ladder is there to do, really, is to slow down your decision making and your thinking so it can be a bit more systematic. Then there's another interesting one, which I've done in a few workshops, and it's quite uncomfortable because the next one is about beliefs. And a bit like assumptions, really, a lot of times we're not aware of our beliefs because they've developed over such a long period of time, you know, and so they might have come from our childhood or all kinds of stuff, and they sit in the background, and of course they influence a lot of our thinking and decision making. And one of the most uncomfortable ones for me was when I was an AP in one of our schools teaching and learning, and like any assistant principal, you're on duty and all that sort of stuff all the time, and you get called to kind of classrooms to help the teacher with behavioural incidents. And I didn't realise it until later on that I had a kind of unconscious belief that boys were more badly behaved than girls.
Mm.
And it might have been because I was a boy myself and I was badly behaved, or because of the school I grew up in, or who knows where it came from. But it was an unconscious thing. If I came to a room and the teacher had said, I don't know, it's all kicking off, I would immediately go to, right, you lot out here, or something like that. Anyway, so that's quite an uncomfortable part of the ladder. And it might mean that you then got to go back down the ladder to think about, oh, hang on a minute, have I selected the right data to then make the right decisions? And so that's tricky. And of course, the last one, as you can imagine, is okay, what am I going to do about this? What's the next best step? So that's kind of a brief overview, and you can go online and kind of Google it and stuff. But why does it resonate with you, Keziah?
I think, particularly when I've gone into schools that are struggling, that there is no adherence to a ladder, or even
Right.
possibly even a rational process for making any decisions. And I think some of the conclusions people make, they jump there and it's experiential. So they've had a bad day.
Yeah.
They've had a really difficult lunch duty. They've had a bad run in with a parent or something like that, and they want to make something better straight away. Um, and you just got to pull it all back. And I suppose they would say, well, I'm observing. I've observed that the behaviour of this group of children is really difficult. But it's actually, is that reliable and valid? It's where is that? Is that just because you've had a rough day and things are really tricky, or is it that you have had a really bad set of mock exam results, and you want to just take everything apart and put everything back together again? And I think, as well as sort of following things through the sort of the process and the ladder, that I think you're right, the sort of the beliefs and your unconscious biases and your expectations are quite significant. And in 95, when I started my secondary teaching career in quite a rough Birmingham school, um, as an English teacher, top floor of a three-story building, asked the caretaker why I couldn't have carpet in my
Right.
classroom like others did at other schools, and he said, well, because the blood will soak in.
Yeah.
So it was quite rough. Um, And I suppose I went into that having been raised and born in the southwest, and although I'd been to uni in Manchester, it was the first time I worked in a sort of ethnically and culturally diverse environment.
Yeah.
And, I took lots of those expectations in. And I suppose I'd listened to people that I'd known outside, and they're like, oh, yeah, 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 yeah. They're sort of these children, their parents push them. These children, their parents don't push them.
Yeah.
And within 6 months, all of that was on his head. So, it's really important. And I also think sometimes we see what the problem is, and we, as leadership teams, or even as individuals, or sometimes when reflecting on our own work, we know what the problem is,
Yeah.
but we try and find a solution. It's
Yeah.
like problem
Yeah.
solution.
Quite
And
right.
actually, you just don't know what causes that problem. And you have got to stop and
Yeah.
slow down and figure out what is actually causing it. And you can use that in a positive way. This is working.
Yeah.
What is actually causing that? Is it what we think it is? Is it something different? So that
Yeah.
really spoke to me in terms of that more systematic approach to solving some of the wicked problems. Though yeah, the wicked problems in education is just education, isn't
Of
it?
course, yes.
It's
I love
just
that.
just
Yeah.
everything to do with the job.
I like that idea. I mean, that's an interesting kind of phrase that I could hear myself saying to someone like, let's just slow this down a little bit.
Mm,
Let's just, slowly, systematically. And I guess if you're a self reflective leader and you know that you tend to jump steps in the ladder when you're stressed or when you're time poor,
mm.
if you know that about yourself, then you can almost self manage by forcing yourself to go through these slower steps. Um, that's really interesting.
But as a leader, you also work with teams that are impatient,
Yeah,
and when you are deliberately slowing things down, they can perceive that as being a blocker
yeah,
or being uncertain.
yeah,
And therefore you have to, I mean, in my leadership teams, we've always done quite a lot of, theoretical things around leadership and
yeah.
decision making. I mean, you can't spend all your time on it, otherwise you wouldn't
No, but
do anything else. But certainly sort of some approaches to that, just to understand what the issues are, because especially when you go into a school that's, in special measures, or, it's a brand new school, but it always had been.
yeah,
Everything needs fixing.
that's really interesting.
Absolutely everything needs fixing. Or at least you think so when you go in, but then you
Yeah,
start to find things that are really very effective and really great. And I think that's what puts people off going into some schools that are perceived to be really challenging, either because of, the area in which they're in, or because of, like a set of Ofsted grades or whatever it is. Um,
yeah,
And actually, there's always pockets of brilliance. There's always, a department or a couple of departments that are wonderful, or there's something that just works. Even at the most broken schools I've visited, there
yeah,
is something wonderful and joyous there.
exactly. And something you were just saying then made me think this idea that some people may perceive our kind of behaviors in the wrong way. Like if I'm
Mm,
trying to slow down because I know that I skip, that might be perceived as
mm,
blocking or whatever. I had a recent experience which comes to mind where I had a new member of the team join, and when they were introducing themselves, it was quite awkward to begin with, but I thought, wow, afterwards, I need to. They introduced themselves and told us like what, like almost like the instructions for them. And they said, you may find at certain times I become really quiet because I'm working on my process. They basically kind of almost sort of said, look, this is who I am. This is what I know about myself, and this is the coping strategies that I've got. So when you see this happening, you know why I'm doing that. And I thought that's
yeah.
really interesting. Um,
We had a new head of department start a couple of years ago, who was neurodiverse, had other protected characteristics as well, but he basically brought in, I think he called it a Haynes manual,
did
and he
he?
gave it to the people he was going to work with. And it's like, this is how I work.
I love that.
Um, and that was really useful. And I think we just assume everyone's going to try and fit around us,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's not that simple, and it's not
No,
that easy.
that's great. Well, let's keep moving on with you because I'm really interested in this. Your next Fast Friends question you chose was about your most treasured memory. So, wow, tell us about that.
Well, again,
There's
trying
lots.
to limit it to one is really difficult. The first one, the main one, is Christmas 1977.
Okay.
So I'm 7 years old, and the year before, um, we had moved into quite a large house in Bradford-on-Avon. Um, bless it. But we moved in with most of my mum's side of the family. We had quite a lot of elderly relatives that needed looking after, and my dad and my mum were pretty much skint. They'd run out, they just couldn't make ends meet anymore. So we moved into this quite large house. So it was, me, mum's, dad, sister, and then it was my nan and my granddad, and then four great grandparents,
Wow.
plus my uncle and aunt, plus
No
I think a
way.
great great aunt. There's loads of us. And the first big Christmas we were in there, they really went to town. So it had a really large garden, obviously, because my mum wanted to be like self. It was the good life era.
Oh,
She had goats, she had chickens, she had ducks, she had like we grew our own veggies and things like that. And there's this massive like fir tree at the end of the garden which they chopped down, and we had a big bay window, and it filled the whole thing. And um, mum and my nan and my great nan and my great great aunt Grace, they spent, and probably my aunt at the time, they spent all of Christmas Eve. I mean, I think they made something like 14 dozen sausage rolls and 8 dozen mince pies. And they also made like their own sweets, like peppermint, like
oh yeah,
little,
gosh.
all those sorts of things. And I just remember lying in front of this roaring wood fire with this huge Christmas tree, with people just keeping on bringing in plates. I mean, when you're little and
Yeah,
you just like loads of food, and just
exactly.
watching, the sort of the 60s Cleopatra on the telly. I mean, that's 4 hours. So that was my Christmas Eve, and that was just the Christmas Eve was better than the Christmas Day because the anticipation was there and everyone was together, and it was wonderfully joyous just being all together.
I love that. Yeah, that is something, and there's something quite simple about that, isn't there? I mean, you weren't saying it was a great Christmas because of the things you got, you know. It was just was it a feeling of like contentment or calmness or
Yeah, it was, everything was warm and everyone was totally determined to enjoy it.
yeah,
And I think that we saw it as the beginning of making new kind of traditions, because obviously up until then we'd all lived in
yeah,
separate houses, and now it was like, this is what a Christmas, we called it the community. I
yeah.
suppose it could have been called a commune, but my granddad was a bit of a right winger, so we were not having that, so it was the community. And there was a very clear division of finance and labor, and there were rotas for everything.
Wow.
There was a rota for locking up at night,
Okay.
things like that, because there was a lot of doors. Um, but yes, it was the warmth of being surrounded by family, and I was, you know, at that time, I think there was just two grandchildren, myself and my sister, and everybody just wanted to treat us, and
Yeah.
not in a kind of a present way, because
No.
we, one of the reasons we're in that house, even though it looked big and posh, is
Yeah. No one
because
knows
we
any
were all
money.
skint. Um, but they wanted to talk to us. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember after moving into the community with all these elderly great grandparents and whatever, the teacher at school had to ask my mum to ask me to not shout at everybody,
Oh
because I had
really?
learnt to communicate with elderly people. You had to shout at them.
Oh man.
And some would say I'm still doing that now, but yeah, it was. I think it was that sense of, well, belonging and
Yeah.
warmth
I
and
think.
feeling completely protected, and it felt a little bit luxurious, the biggest tree we ever had. And I
Yeah.
mean, 2 years later, the tree was
Of
like in a
course.
pot
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
the other
Yeah.
ones had
But
gone.
just for that moment,
Um, but yeah,
that's
it
great.
was lovely.
I love that. Okay. Well, let's move on to your second kind of ignition point. And you'll have
Mm.
to explain the acronym here because it's a new one for me. It says there is no GPG.
Yeah, gender pay gap.
Right.
Um, and it was probably 11 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, just over 10 years ago. Um, I think, might have been Ambition Institute, might have been someone else. They did some research into what was happening in education and the pay gap, particularly at leadership levels, and the misrepresentation of, where women are three-quarters or two-thirds of the profession, and only a third of head teachers, and there is substantial pay gaps between, and like for like schools, and at the time, Twitter was a nice place,
Yeah.
and there was a blogging forum called Staff Room, and a number of us that we didn't know one another in real life. We were blogging and we were talking to one another and we were sharing some of this. And one of them, Helena Marsh, Hannah Wilson, Vivian Porritt, of course, um, Samina Chowdhury, Jules Dorby. Um, we said, well, people are challenging us on this. Here's all the data.
Yeah.
And people are just coming back at us with, no, there's no such thing. I know a female head teacher and she earns more than anybody else I know. And it was just like,
God.
it was just ridiculous stuff. So we arranged to meet up at random, like, little hotel just off the M4, for afternoon tea, and that's where Women Ed was born.
Really?
Um, and we Not all of us could get down there. Samina, I mean, she still lives up in the distant north. She was, on speakerphone for the whole thing, and we ate sandwiches, and we talked about how there must be more than just us that
Yeah.
feel aggrieved and annoyed. I think I said, well, should we organise like a little conference? And at that time, some guy that works at Microsoft had seen us blog about this. I think he just thought this sounds like an interesting way of marketing to lots of
Yeah.
female educators. So Microsoft lent us some of their London offices for a Saturday conference. Um, and yeah, I mean, by the end of the afternoon, we had a Twitter name, we had everything else lined up, and we were going, and that's 10 years.
That's
And
incredible, isn't it?
I think genuinely, if I think we hadn't had any pushback, we
Yeah.
might not have come out fighting.
Well,
Um,
there's two things I want to ask about. I guess let's first of all, where are we now with Women Ed? So where's it got to now?
where we've got to now is it's huge, it's international, and that's something we didn't expect.
Wow.
I mean, well, we didn't expect anything.
Yeah.
We expected a few fed up women to get together and moan about things. But gosh, there's thousands of us
Wow.
that, and it's not just the gender pay gap, it's all sorts of things. It's the being represented at leadership level. It is particularly challenging for women of colour, with other protected characteristics and the intersectionality of that. So we've got the four campaigns, and we also really advocate for flexible working. I think Emma Shepherd's MTPT have done incredible work
Yeah.
around maternity,
Yeah.
but people also need flexibility for lots of different things. So we are literally all around the world,
Love
and we
it.
have network leaders in all of those areas. We are now a registered charity.
Right.
We have some money in the bank. We've got a website, womened.com. We blog. We have sessions at high profile events, so we were at Festival of
Yeah.
Education. We've got 3 books. I co-edited the first 2 with Vivian. Because of punk leadership, I didn't do the third one.
Sure.
But weirdly, it's the most angry one. The one I wasn't involved in is the most angry, which I think
I
is
mean,
quite impressive. Um, and people are still contacting us all the time.
yeah.
It's not, we don't have a membership. You don't join up. If you just want to get involved, you can do. If you want to dip in and out, you can do. And we know there's been so many testimonials around people saying, I went for that job, or I
Yeah.
tried this. And some of the things we do very practically are, we will offer to look over people's letters of application.
No.
Vivian has done on the YouTube channel lots of videos on how to negotiate your starting salary
Right.
because women are a bit rubbish at that. Men are a bit better, and that accounts for some of the gender pay gap, not all of it, but for some of it. Um, and it is just a wonderfully affirming, positive movement, and I'm just very honoured to have been invited along really for that cup of tea that
Incredible
afternoon.
achievement. I mean, the one I was going to say, which is, I don't know if the irony was lost on people when I admitted to not knowing what GPG meant. I mean, surely there's some irony
Yeah, I
there.
mean, yeah, I mean, if I'd said the gender pay gap, you would have known.
I guess I
And
would, yeah, but that
and
idea that
and
I've been protected from that, haven't I? You know.
a little bit. I mean, I'm more than happy to fresh your memory, Chris, and most other
Well, it gets
people's.
me asking for
And
my
what
money.
I'm yeah, I'm really pleased that one of the first things Bridget Phillipson did when she came in was that she wanted the pay the pay review body to look at other pay gaps in the sector. So around ethnicity,
Yeah, of course.
she really wanted to make sure that if you are working part time but you've got TLR you're expected to do the whole TLR, that your TLR is
Very
paid in
wonderful.
full, not prorated down. So already there's been a few things she's done. I mean, there's an awful lot more to do. I mean, you can report an ethnic pay gap, but you've then got to be really systematic about how you sort that out. Um, and we know from some of the international research that the intersectionality of gender and race it just makes things really bad. It
Yeah.
makes things
Well,
horrendous.
like I say, we'll talk about this again at the end. But if people are interested, then get in touch with Women Ed and just get involved. So let's move on to your second kind of launch pad. And so this one is something again. I mean, that's the nature of the launch pads. That I trip over these things, don't know anything about them, research them, and think that's interesting, and then
Yeah.
try to organize my thinking in some sort of graphical way. And this one's called the Pyramid of Purpose. And there's this idea that when teams are formed, it's super important that time is protected for sort of collaborative conversations around purpose and making sure that everyone's clear about it. Because I think if you skimp on time or assume that people understand the purpose, you get tripped up further down the line. Or, in my experience, even more dangerously, you don't ever get tripped up, but you never reach a level of effectiveness that you
Mm,
should do because people, they're
mm,
just doing what they should do. And so this, pyramid of purpose starts with some, I guess, questions really that if you were part of a new team, or I guess if you were joining a new team, you could maybe ask these questions to try and understand what the existing purpose is. But the first one is kind of why? Why do we exist? So what is our vision, our values, or our mission? The next question is kind of what are we trying to do? So it's a bit more tangible and kind of measurable, I guess. So goals, targets, kind of KPIs, key performance indicators, or objectives. The next one is kind of okay, well, let's think more strategy, let's think more operational. How are we going to achieve those things? So approaches, actions, and processes. Then the last one in the formal kind of pyramid is kind of who will be involved. So it's a bit of kind of who is part of this team as a core, who sits around the outside, who are the wider stakeholders, and so on and so on. And then when I started digging around a little bit, I found a couple of other questions that people were asking when linked to purpose, but weren't part of the original pyramid. And that was almost kind of like, okay, well, when will we start? What support will we need? And then ultimately, how will we know we've reached our goal? How will we measure impact?
mm.
But, why does it resonate with you, Kezia?
I think well, it certainly ties into Women Ed,
Yeah,
um, because I think for some of when we were getting going, we were getting caught up a little bit with the who will be involved rather
right.
than the why do we exist, and the what we are trying to do, and really getting a lot of clarity around that. So once we'd kind of launched, we had to go backwards and start to figure some of this stuff out because I think we just went straight to, what we're going to do.
Yeah.
let's do some stuff, and it wasn't focused. But it's also something, I think when you go into a leadership team or you go into a school, that you just have to make sure that everybody is aligned with what the vision and values and the mission is. And it's not something necessarily you can change. You just can't say, oh, well, I'm going to completely change the makeup of this school.
Yeah.
Um, it just doesn't work that way.
No.
And and I think now I've worked within the trust sector for 15 years. Um, and before that, I worked in local authority schools, and I worked in, I mean, obviously before sort of maths were even a thing, really. I'd worked in some Worcestershire and Warwickshire, and they were too big. They were too huge, and it was, I suppose, a little bit Bristol effect. It was, everyone was really competitive, and I
Yeah.
think within, if you have a reasonably sized multi-academy trust, you can make sure that purpose is aligned. So we are quite a hyper local multi-academy trust, and again, I do apologise for the dogs if you can hear them on the mic. That they've seen someone on the telly. Um, you do have that. You can have that sense that even though we are, we're very weird, diverse multi-academy trust. We've got a primary school, we've got a special school, we've got two APs that are actually kind of pros as well. We've
Right.
got a studio school, we've got two grammar schools.
Yeah. Wow.
Um, the rest are comps, some with sixth form, some without. But if you can align your purpose and think, well, we've got around 1,200 children here, no, 12,000 children here, they're all our children. So I may be based at Q3 Tipton. I could be based at the ladder school, which is AP. I could be popping into the primary school. They are all our children.
Yeah.
And that is our purpose. And I think as a sector, we've lost that a little bit, because actually in Bristol, if they'd thought all the children in Bristol are
Yeah.
our children, it might have been
Big
different.
different story. Yeah.
Um, and when I went to Tipton, you make friends with the next door school, because all the kids in Tipton
Yeah. Of
are your
course.
children. And I don't think there is that. There's too much competition.
Yeah.
There's too much, you take that kid because I don't want them. They're not really what I
Yeah.
want. Um, how the heck has education got into that situation?
I don't know.
We're
Yes.
not Asda.
No. Exactly. Well, that's really interesting. And of course, a couple of things spring to mind there. The first one being, a similar experience to you with Women Ed, but on a much smaller scale. As we know, we've got a mutual colleague, kind of Tracy Goodyear, and
Mm,
Tracy, myself, and Sam Gibbs started this kind of network of
mm,
CPD trust leaders, which is, again, almost kind of surprised us a little bit, like you did with yours,
mm,
about getting bigger and bigger. And we've started to look at this, but now being reminded of it, I wonder whether we can go back and have another look. And it might be useful for leaders to periodically keep coming back to something like this. And then another crazy idea: if people are feeling brave tomorrow, 10% braver, dig this out on the internet or from the book, or just email me, and then get individual members of your team to write answers to these questions independently, and then bring them together and see how much clarity there is. That would be
yeah.
scary, but potentially useful.
Because I think if a team has got clarity, and I'm not just talking about a senior leadership team, I'm
Yeah,
talking about, say, all the staff, but if you get the kids involved in that and the parents and carers involved in that,
yeah,
they know why everybody's there. It becomes so much easier. And on the
gotcha.
really difficult days, or when you disagree with each other, um, you will find somewhere to stand. And I suppose when I've always had, and I have always had, difficult conversations with parents and carers, there's only a couple I've hid from. Um, if you can establish what they want for their child,
Yeah,
you will probably find it's pretty much exactly the same as you want for their child.
exactly.
But you're coming at it from two different directions. And if you can see it from their point of view, they will try and see it from your point of view, and you will find um, that the conflict kind of resolves itself. They
Yeah,
want their child to be happy. You want their child to be happy, but you also want them to do really well at school. So in
yeah,
10 years' time, they can also be really happy earning some money. Um, and then you can find these solutions. like Joe Cox says, we always have more in common, and I've always found that to be the case. Um,
I love that quote.
and I think the artificial barriers there and people trying to find reasons to pick holes in things. I mean, it's why I've left Twitter. It just became too adversarial. It became too unpleasant. And I do still put my head above the parapet
Yeah.
because you have to. And you got to stand up for your values. But um, I suppose that's when it matters, when it's important, rather than
Stand up.
something ridiculous. Someone
All
wants
right,
to
well,
pick
we're
a
going to
hole in
finish
there.
off. I don't know whether this is going to be light-hearted or not. I don't know what you're going to tell us, but the final Fast Friends question that Kezia chose was, what embarrassing moment in your life comes quickest to mind?
Uh, well, because I've always loved working with my colleagues. I used to be in charge of the end of year school barbecue.
Okay.
Um, at a school called Rudrush, where England international footballer Eniolo Aluko attended, former
Nice.
Duran Duran Nick Rhodes attended, and
Oh,
now Wimbledon men's double champion Lloyd Glasspool attended. Had the privilege of teaching two of those. He's just in the middle of nowhere. It's a weird place. Um, and I was trying to get this barbecue going, and it just wasn't going. And I don't know what was going on. So I asked the science tech to go and get me something that was flammable, that we could get the fire going. So he went and got me this. I mean, he was a nutter. I mean, he 2 pints Tony, he was called. Um, Bless his cotton socks if he's still alive. And so we went and got me this stuff, and I threw it on the fire, and there was something on the top of it, and it literally just bounced off on top of me and completely set me on fire. And I
no.
don't know how I remembered this, but I remembered to drop and roll. Everyone around me went quiet and sort of doing this drop and rolly thing. And then that wasn't the well, it was, because like you got to be an idiot to set yourself on fire when
Fire.
someone brings over something that's like a clear liquid.
Yeah.
Um, the the first aider, everyone called her matron. I think she had a first aid certificate, but
Right.
she came and got me in a wheelchair with a blanket and wheeled me out in the wheelchair just as the kids were going home.
No.
And the bloody head of mass was still asking where her sausage was.
You're kidding me.
And ironically, about a year before that, I'd slipped over on some ice and fallen on my back. They showed the CCTV at my um, leaving speech, because I literally just went up in the air, flat, straight
Wow.
back down, and she wheeled me around in a wheelchair then.
Oh,
And all the kids, and that was lesson changeover.
you didn't pick up a nickname from either of those things then?
No, but
Not
I am, I've got to be honest. I mean, today I had to go to the doctor about the pains I've got in my hips. I'm thinking, well, I probably know where most of this comes from.
either
Um,
an ice
yeah,
or when I was caught on fire. That's so funny.
yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And sadly, we come to the end now. But wow, what a pleasure to talk to you more. Again, to have watched your work and to kind of engage with it at a distance, to now have the chance to kind of find out a bit more about where it came from, is a super pleasure. So. We've talked a little bit about Woman's Ed. How can people get involved in other things that you're doing? I guess the books are available.
The women ed books are out there. 10% braver, being 10% braver, and disruptive women. The website womened.com, the YouTube channel. Just get yourself involved. We have events. Join in. Then I'm also co-chair of Head Teachers Roundtable, which, we don't really have so many events. We are a non-political think tank trying to influence policy. So just read our stuff, and
Yeah.
if you agree with it, share it, and, moan at your MP about it. And then obviously Punk Leadership, which everyone should buy 4 or 5 copies of, and then leave fantastic reviews on Amazon.
Yeah.
That would be wonderful. Thank you. But I suppose, really, to get involved. I mean, it is fantastic no matter what role you do, but leadership is not as scary as people think it is. And actually, headship is probably. I mean, Vic Goddard's book is called Best Job in the World, and it is.
Yeah.
And people think it's onerous and pressurized, and you're dealing with all the rubbish all the time. And yes, there is some of that, but it is also warm and welcoming, and you can change the world for those children.
Yep.
You have that power. You know, when everyone always, you moan and go, oh, they won't do this, or they want us to do, you become the they,
Yeah.
and you can do it the way it should be done.
Perfect. Well, what a great way to finish. Thanks to everyone for listening. As I said, connect with Keziah on Blue Sky or on LinkedIn.
Yep,
Same thing for me. And if you're interested in the Launchpads book, that's on Amazon. And yeah, we will see you at the next one. Thanks very much.
that's brilliant. And Chris,